Welcome to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. This podcast is all about conversations about healing and rising from the ashes of your grief and trauma. In this podcast, we will be deconstructing and highlighting the different aspects of grief and loss. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Zampitella. Good morning. My name is Dr. Christina Zampitella, and you are joining me today at Phoenix Rising, a podcast really focused on exploring death, loss, grief, and trauma, trying to examine the different kinds of losses, different aspects of loss, but also how we manage to explore and adapt to the different kinds of things that we go to. But I think in order to get a really good understanding of who is running this podcast, it's important to know the backstory. And so I'm here to tell you that backstory, because I'm not just coming to you as a licensed clinical psychologist who has like a lot of theoretical information. I'm coming to you as a survivor of loss, as a survivor of trauma, and somebody who wants to be able to tell you my story so that we can relate to one another. So this is my story. I was born in 1973 to my parents, Dennis and Kathy Zampitella. They were young. My mom was 20, my dad was 21. I certainly can't even imagine having children at that age. I was barely, trying to launch out of my house at that age. And we were born, meaning my brother, my sister, and I, within a 7-year period of time, to a family with no money. I mean, no money. We were bounced from one place to another, evicted from one place, ran from other places. My dad was a musician, hard career to make any money out of. My mom staying home to make sure that she was able to take care of us. So one day my dad comes home and he sees my brother, my mom, and I literally eating bread and butter for dinner. And there was a shift in my father, the way that he looked at what his responsibilities were as the breadwinner. And so eventually left the music business, which he remains in contact with now and is really passionate about it now. So I'm glad that he regained his passion for that. But in that time, my father then moved into selling cars. And it took a long time. Again, bouncing from place to place to place, settling in a place here in Delaware that was pretty poor. I'm 9 years old. My family is living in a neighborhood in which I'm the minority, but the entire neighborhood, both not only the neighborhood where I was a minority, but also kind of in a further location up the hill. We used to call it the hill. There was also lots and lots of, poor white people. So the entire area was a very low socioeconomic background. So at 9 years old, I would get followed by a group of girls. I used to call them the girls. And I would get followed by a group of girls, and randomly they would just beat me up. Groups of them. Not only was there trauma from moving from school to school, location to location, no sense of stability. But now here I am, 9 years old. I have no idea why I'm getting beat up so much. And end up one day walking outside of my apartment complex and was sitting on the stairs after throwing away some trash. And there was a man who had a whole bunch of kids lined up in a group. And he was teaching in the parking lot. So he's teaching these kids what I now know was martial arts. And he looked at me and he's like, "Come here." And I'm like, "No." And he pointed at me and he said, "Come here." And I was like, well, I guess I'm going over there because, stranger danger. What's that, right? So I go over and he begins, has me in the line and we're learning basic punches. Within about a week, I'm the only one left. And this man, who to this day I do not know his name, and boy, would it be kind of cool that he found out about this podcast, but he kept me almost on a daily basis working with me in martial arts in the parking lot. And when it rained, because, this is Delaware, he would bring me on into the hallway of the actual apartment complex. And I found out he lived upstairs with his wife and child, and that he had been seeing me run from the school bus as the girls would run after me as I was trying to get back to the house. Now, we didn't have a phone. We didn't have a car. We just were surviving there. But for a year, which was the longest we had stayed anywhere, this man taught me martial arts. He wouldn't tell me what kind of martial arts. He wouldn't, like I said, he wouldn't, tell me his name. He would only let me call him sensei. And the reason why I'm telling you this is that this was a huge, huge impact, I think, on the resilience that I've been able to build in my life, because this wasn't the end of my engagement in martial arts. Leaving that location was incredibly bittersweet. I was really sad to leave this person that had done nothing but try to help me. I felt stronger. I was able to protect myself one time when these group of girls picked up on me at, I don't know, someplace in the neighborhood. They used to make me have to fight, but one day I knew how to fight back. And that ended up with a concussion because the rest of them jumped on me. So hence the concussion. That's the first story of that. We ended up moving, and we moved into another neighborhood that was a bit safer. And my father, I guess, was starting to get a little bit more successful in his business. And so there was a little bit more sense of security there. I had friends. I was a newspaper girl. It just seemed like there was some healing for our family at that point. Again, my father remained a car salesman or a car salesman manager. He used to jump from place to place. And I do know that throughout this time, now that I'm able to reflect back, that he was struggling with drug addiction throughout this entire time. But nonetheless, this kind of functional addict that he was. So again, we stayed there like a year and a half, like always, and then ended up moving to another location in Newark, Delaware. Now, this is the place we had the most stability in my life. From 7th grade to 12th grade, we stayed in one house. It was astounding. I don't even think I knew how to adjust, and middle school already is really, really challenging. Well, as I lived there, there was a little outdoor, was like a mall. And in that mall, dojo opened up. And this is important, again, because sometimes finding mentors when your parents can't be your mentor, or you can't find other, adults that actually are able to be helpful, finding mentors outside is just exactly what you need. So I found this dojo. Now, we didn't have any money. My parents aren't paying for any of this stuff. And I started cleaning the arcade machines in order to make money so I could pay for my karate martial arts classes. Eventually, my sensei allowed me to clean the martial arts room and actually start teaching classes as I got further up along in my training. And I loved it. I started going to tournaments. I started fighting. I started doing my sparring, doing my forms, and that became a huge part as it began to help me understand the strength that I may have, even though that it came with a lot of previous trauma. Something I didn't mention is that there was a period of time where my parents actually beat the crap out of each other. It was about a 3-month period of time. I was 7. Up and through college, I think in graduate school, I thought it was 2 years. It wasn't. It was 3 months. Won't even go into that, but plenty of domestic violence in my life as well, and a lot of drug use around that time with my family. Teaching martial arts classes to kids, sometimes to adults, and trying to navigate adolescence, which was incredibly difficult. You couldn't pay me to go back to my teenage years, and very, very challenging to do that. I started playing softball. At the same time, fell in love with softball and just got involved with different kind of groups, started playing clarinet, and just randomly trying to figure out who the heck I was. So got through high school with lots of broken hearts and people that you're just trying to figure out who you are. You're in a 4-month relationship in high school and you're like the class couple. That's it. It's like you have hit the you guys are going to get married mark. But of course, lots of broken hearts. Don't want to underestimate the pain that comes with that. So in graduating, I'd really fallen in love with biology in high school and decided I was going to go to college to become a molecular biologist. So I ended up with a scholarship at the University of Delaware for biology, and hated biology. Well, I liked the biology, but I got to organic chemistry with Dr. von Frankenberg. That was his name. He was 144 years old and convinced of that. And 3 days a week at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm supposed to show up for chemistry. First of all, I still to this day don't see clients before 10. 8 o'clock wasn't going to happen. I was there 1.25 days per week on average. Just wasn't going to happen. Had no interest in chemistry. So did not do real well. And I had excelled in school through all of this. So here's my first D. You would have thought the world caved in. So I go to biochemistry, and walked in and was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I walked out and I drop out of school, completely just drop out of college, and decide to sell vacuum cleaners door to door for a year and a half. During that time, I'm starting to realize that my brother Damien was really struggling with mental illness, and bipolar disorder and ADHD were not understood in the 80s and 90s. So he began to medicate himself with heroin and other kinds of drugs. My sister, being 2 years behind him, kind of engaged in that same behavior, but also bringing those drugs into the home, landed the unfortunate opportunity for my entire family to get addicted to heroin. Not me. I wasn't living at home. I had moved out of the home when I was 18. So here I am. I'm selling vacuum cleaners door to door for a living, not going to college, just floundering in my early 20s. Just surviving. And end up in 1995. Obviously, I'll never forget this. In January 9th, 1995, I was renting a house, and my house burned down. And I lost anything I ever had. A couple things I found my birth certificate. That was weird. I found one of my karate trophies, a couple other things, but entire house burned down. Lost everything. And I look at the back of my car, and I see my purse. And I realized I hated my life where it was. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. In the midst of all of this, I end up starting to have seizures. And I never had them before. I had a febrile seizure when I was 5, but never had seizures growing up. And I get diagnosed with epilepsy, a whole other loss on top of everything else that was going on. So I move into a friend's house. I didn't know really where to go. I tried to rebuild my life with the help of the Red Cross, which, my God, they're amazing. And I'm very, very thankful for them. I tried to rebuild. I was not rebuilding very well. And who would? And again, during this time, my parents were kind of there, kind of not there. And it wasn't that there wasn't love in our house. There actually was quite a bit of love. And there were times of a lot of stability, and a lot of expression of emotion was never an issue. Dealing with those emotions and how we interacted with each other, well, that was a whole different ballgame. I look in the back of my car, like I said, I'm hating my life. And to make a longer part of this journey shorter, I decide to apply to go back to school at the University of Delaware. And I was like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be a bio major. Molecular biology isn't going to happen. But I had taken a couple of psychology courses and realized I really loved psychology. And then realized when I applied to go back to school that I was going to switch my major to psychology minored in biology because I liked the biology and I had all the classes anyway. But I really liked psychology. And my grades go from being like a 2.7 to almost like a 4.0 during those two. You know how it is. You're not changing your whole GPA. But anyway, really, really loved psychology. They gave me my scholarship back. I had gone on a full-blown biology scholarship. I never would have been able to afford school otherwise. My parents weren't going to be able to pay for it. And God knows student loans, that's a whole different ballgame. So I switched to psychology. I started being a teaching assistant. I started being a research assistant. I started working full-time in a variety of different jobs. One was a teaching assistant and working with kids between kindergarten and second grade. Loved working with them. Still not stable about where I was moving or who I was in, a relationship with, but did go back to school and fell in love with psychology and knew about my senior year I was going to go on and become a psychologist. I finally figured that out. In the interim, I'm in this relationship with this person who became very close to my family. Now, I didn't understand what drug use looked like. And I know that sounds weird because hey, Christina, you've been telling me, you experienced drug use throughout your life with your family. Yeah, but it doesn't mean I understood it. It didn't mean that I understood what those behaviors were. I just thought that those were behaviors. I never saw drugs in front of me. My parents were still together, and I didn't know any better. And one day it finally hit me, and I was like, oh my God, my entire family is addicted to heroin and probably other drugs as well. So I am 4 years older than my brother Damien, 7 years older than my sister Danielle. And I remember very specifically sitting out my backyard on a bench in a green robe and realizing, oh my God, I lost my family. Like, we had been a very enmeshed family they wouldn't even take my phone calls for a while. And I just didn't understand why I was being ostracized from my family. And it occurred to me, oh crap, that's what this is. And I remember sobbing. And I'm in this relationship with this person who's actually supplying my family with the drugs, who's lying to me, who's telling me that he's working. And he's not. He would actually go out, say that he was working at a place where he was, being an assistant chef with his clothes, rub food all over his clothes, come out, put the clothes into the washing machine, and I end up finding out that he wasn't working at all. One of the most traumatic times in my life was being with this person. This is hard for me to describe the amount of disbelief that comes when you are faced with a series of losses that are so beyond your comprehension that the reality of what's happening, it just doesn't compute. And long story short, he ended up killing 3 of my animals. And it took me back to a time when I was 5 years old, when I was being babysat by this guy who also killed animals in front of me. And it just flashed back. I had repressed that for so long, but it all came back at one time. And when I confronted that person about what he did, it really beat me really hard, to the point where I ended up with 17 staples across my head. And yet through all of this, I stayed in school. I needed out. That's how I knew how to get out. That's what that was my savior. So got out of that relationship, moved back up to Pennsylvania, started getting myself together, started getting physically healthier, trauma, trying to figure out how to navigate that trauma. Had a small support system, couldn't turn to my family. They were addicted to drugs. So had to rebuild. And I started working in the Delco Blind Sight Center So working as a career counselor with people with visual impairments. And there was a healing that started to happen in this place. There was a very nice work family. And the work I was doing was helping people. So I was doing that while also working in a psychiatric hospital, just as like an intake coordinator and really trying to move into the mental health field. During that time, I end up meeting somebody who ended up becoming my first husband. He was a Marine, very safe, he was a German guy, Marine, no emotionality. That's what I needed. I needed somebody with stability. And we stayed together, for 7 years. He was a very good person, but he was gone 2/3 of our marriage. In the interim, I'm still going to school. I get into graduate school. I get into graduate school to pursue my first master's degree in counseling psychology. Now, at the end of receiving that degree, which that would have been 2001, so I did graduate school from 1999 to 2001, we decided that I wanted to apply to doctorate schools. Now, the doctorate program I wanted was in Southern California, in San Diego. It was an integrative psychology program. So what happens, though, in the middle of my master's program after my first semester is my brother Damien dies on Christmas Day in 1999 of a drug overdose. Now, he had been in work release for a year for drugs. He ran from work release. That day on Christmas, I found out he had gone to my parents' house. And I was having like 17 people over. I was living with my first husband, and I was having 17 people over for Christmas. And I get on the phone because he's not there, and I'm like, "Where are you?" "I'm at mom and dad's." "You're not supposed to be at mom and dad's. You're supposed to be at work release." And he goes, "I left work release." "You had 3 days left for work release." So obviously this kind of unconscious sabotaging, that's kind of like where my guess is. And he was with a friend. And I was like, "Well, I wish you were here, but I don't want two, people to come to my house who are fugitives. So, I really wish you were here. Damien, I have to go. I have to finish cooking dinner. I love you. Goodbye." That "I love you" part became very important to me because I know that was the last thing I said to my brother. And I hadn't seen him for a year. So Christmas night, I get a call from my sister, sobbing, "Damien's dead. Damien's dead." I'm like, "What do you mean Damien's dead?" "Damien's dead." So my husband and I went down, we picked her up. She's sobbing in the back. There was no confirmation from anybody that Damien was actually dead, but she knew it. So we go to the hospital. I can hear my mother screaming while I'm in the parking lot walking towards the emergency room. Still at this point, everybody addicted to heroin. So I go in and I see my brother. And I can't say this without emotion, of course. But that was one of the worst moments in my life that I am almost 50 years old now. And I was 26, and I, to this day, can see that image, that traumatic image, and still entered into this, I'm going to make sure that everybody's taken care of. I was a very parentified child. As you can imagine, when your parents don't function and you're the oldest child, you're the one that begins to take care of everything, around you if you really want to be able to survive. So going to the doctors, you have to be careful what you give my mom in order to calm her down. She has an addiction to heroin, which was already absolutely just mortifying to tell people. The days after that are very fuzzy. I remember when we went we had a memorial, he was cremated, and we had the memorial. And I remember this one woman saying to me, "This is the saddest memorial I've ever been to." Now, had I known then I would have had a lot to say about that. But I just kind of looked at her like, well, of course it is. But I couldn't even wrap my head around what this person said to me. So we end up having this memorial, and I speak, at the memorial. My mom speaks at the memorial. We had to pull her back. She was a mess, and understandably so. So that's Christmas Day, 1999. About 3 weeks later, my grandfather dies. 2 weeks after that, my sister gave up her newborn son for adoption. And then about a month after that, my mom moves back to the Midwest. I'm from the East Coast. Back to the Midwest, where her family is from, because she just couldn't function and needed to go back to her family. But that was another loss. It was like losing my mother. We became the forgotten children, me and my sister. My sister's going through all the loss she's gone through. I'm going through mine. I'm having a difficult time trying even to connect to her. And then my parents leave. This all happened between my first semester and second semester in my first master's program in counseling psychology. And what did I do? I went right back to school. That was my structure. That was my safety net. I continued to work. That was a family that was, not taking drugs. That was a group of people who were supportive of me and supportive of my growth. The adjustment to, there was a moment, I think I'm going to share this moment with you, because there's going to be a podcast where I'm going to talk about extraordinary experiences. I'm a very scientifically minded person. If something happens, I want to understand it on a scientific basis. But guess what? There's certain things that can't be explained scientifically. The day after Damien died, so I know I'm kind of bouncing a little bit here, but I wanted to come back to this. The day after my brother died, I was getting into the shower, and I said out loud, Damien, if you're okay, I'd like for you, I want to know that you're okay. And I wasn't even sure what my after-death beliefs were at that point, but hey, I'm going to put that out there. So I'm sitting on the couch. I'm stirring this spaghetti that I wasn't going to eat, but there it was. My now ex-husband was laying on the couch. And all of a sudden, I wish I could truly put it into words, but I'll do it the best that I can. It's like my breath stopped. There was this pause in my breath. Not an uncomfortable pause, but this pause. And this amazing feeling washed over my body of peace and of love. And immediately I start crying. Like the tears aren't even like going down my face, they're like popping out in front of me. And I grabbed my then husband's leg and I went, oh my God, he's okay. He's okay. He's going to be okay. I could feel it.
Thank you for listening to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. We want to be a resource for anyone who is experiencing loss, and this is a simple way you can help us spread the word. Check out our show description. There you'll find a link to connect with me on social media, as well as helpful articles and resources.